Ling-Si, frowning confusedly, thought, even as someone who has been reborn, this situation is ridiculous. Dumpling and Ling-Si sat on the back of a wolf-like monster, leading a crowd of various monsters. The protagonist thought, to think the dungeon's monsters are helping a player to clear the way. If other players were to see this, they'd probably report him for cheating. Dumpling told the monsters in front of them to get out of the way, and when they heard her, they froze fearfully in place. She told the protagonist with a smile they were very obedient. Ling-Si wondered if it was because of Dumpling's bloodline. To begin with, the dragon-scaled demon was a sovereign rank boss in this underground world. However, Ling-Si never expected that Dumpling would hold so much power over the mobs here, and he wondered if that meant that he could really rely on Dumpling and breeze through this dungeon without having to fight. Looking at the monsters walking between the rocks in an even formation, the protagonist thought that, in that case, that would be the most incredible dungeon clearing method in history. The huge monster slammed another monster against the stone wall with a blow of its clawed paw. The giant lizard under Dumpling's command towered over the other monster who was looking at it fearfully. Ling-Si thought that this entire journey was a breeze. The monsters with good-natured smiles said goodbye to Dumpling, who waved back at them. In front of them was a stone structure with a huge hooded skull with huge horns, inside of which was a blue portal. Before the main character even realized, they're at the boss location. Raising an eyebrow, Ling-Si with an awkward smile thought that this could cause tons of Heavenland players to die with envy, and, even though this dungeon is only a small-scale one in the underground world, its difficulty level could be said to be fatal to the players right now. Looking at the symbol on this boss door, Ling-Si wondered if it was another demon. He wondered if it meant that Dumpling would be able to subdue him. With a smirk, the protagonist thought that if that was the case, he would like to make an experiment. Ling-Si and Dumpling stepped out of the portal in the stone corridor. Dumpling said there are so many monster statues in here. Ling-Si thought it had the atmosphere of a boss room. Frowning, he thought that the things is there's no boss. There was no one in the stone room in front of them. The dialogue box said, Dungeon Protection Mechanism, as the time you have taken to get to this point is too short, the boss has not yet been spawned. This is to prevent you from speed grinding this dungeon. Please wait. 1 hour later, the stone monsters came to life, mouths open in anger. A blue portal appeared in the air, and a voice said, O adventurer who has come to examine the ravine of death, I will turn your heads into brand new pendants and wear them on my chest. The shepherd of death, wearing a hood, held in his hand a skull shrouded in purple flames. He looked forward in surprise. Ling-Si used the vessel of the restless chaos and said he's finally here. He said with a sinister smirk that the time he had to wait for him was enough time to come up with a complete strategy to overpower him. The protagonist stabbed his opponent with a dagger, saying that he was a dagger fodder for him. The shepherd of death cast Cry of the Undead, and Ling-Si thought that now was his chance. Grinning, he thought it's up to Dumpling now. The boss was leaning on the ground with his bony hands. Dumpling was hovering in the air in front of him, purple energy gathering in front of her face. Boss, whose eyes reflected Dumpling, was surprised to see that it was a dragon-scaled demon. Dumpling and the shepherd of death shot out energy, but Dumpling's purple energy quickly overpowered him. She asked how dare he compete with her. A burst of purple energy lifted stone debris into the air. Ling-Si rounded his eyes in surprise, and the boss shouted his surrender. Standing on all fours, he bowed his head in front of Dumpling. He said he was way out of line, and they could go ahead. Pointing to the door behind him, he said they would win once they got through that door. The shepherd of death said there are lots of little pebbles around, and told Dumpling to take care not to hurt her feet. Ling-Si thought happily that it had worked, and as he expected, as one who has the superior bloodline of the dragon-scaled demon, Dumpling's suppression over demon-type monsters is absolute. The door glowed brightly, and the protagonist praised Dumpling. He thought one would usually have to defeat the boss for the boundary to be dispelled and that door to be unlocked, and it has now opened for them just like that. Ling-Si, remembering the revival stone, thought he hadn't encountered any hidden mission along the way, and he'd almost forgotten about it because this boss fight was too easy. He whispered something to Dumpling and they glared ominously. Dumpling asked the boss where the revival stone was. She said her daddy needs it to revive his friend. The shepherd of death wondered if he was still a boss. Ling-Si thought he was supposed to defeat the boss, then get this skull from him and put it on this mechanism to activate. Normally, they would have needed to gather 3 different symbols from various parts of the dungeon and put them together to activate the mission. The hidden symbols were to be found along the way, or on the monsters. Players have to possess keen observational skills to discover them, but they skipped all that. Dumpling asked where it was. Ling-Si wondered how many times did it take for the players in his previous life to clear this dungeon to discover this hidden mission. The boss said, point the way to the revival of souls. The protagonist thought the boss was proactively giving it to them. Looking at the big blue stone, Ling-Si thought the key phrase is point the way to the revival of the souls, and that's where the boss appeared, the peak of this dungeon. Dumpling exclaimed that she found it. She gave the stone to the protagonist in her hand, and he thought it's all thanks to Dumpling that this dungeon became so simple. The dialogue box says, Revival Stone, a special item. It is an extremely rare precious crystal. This extremely rare crystal has the power to revive summons and pets. Existing only in the depths of the underground world, it has absorbed countless souls over the years, and contains astonishing mysterious power. Ling Si thought with a smirk, Knight of the Glorious, wait for me. I'm coming to revive you. After he got the revival stone, Summon Revival Point appeared on the map. So, Ling Si has come to the nearest revival point. He put the revival stone into the blue fire. The dialogue box says, you are using a revival stone. Will you revive a summon or a pet? Dumpling said with a smile that he was looking forward to it and was curious to see what his friend was like. The dialogue box says, your revival stone has been consumed. Reviving your summon. Ling Si looked at the fire with a smile. Knight of the Glorious in broken golden armor appeared out of the blue flames. Dumpling asked if that is the friend he wanted to revive. She said he looked strange. The dialogue box says, your summon is being reconstructed. Please wait. A sphere-shaped barrier surrounded the knight, and Dumpling exclaimed he's becoming an egg. She asked if Ling Si's friend was going to come out of an egg. She reminded him that she had come out of an egg. The protagonist remained silent. The knight opened his eyes and called out to his master. Dumpling asked if he had revived. Ling Si answered an affirmative. A knight's arm clad in golden armor appeared from the barrier. After shattering the barrier, he came out of it completely, regaining his usual appearance. Kneeling down, the knight told the protagonist that he had given him a second life, and he would continue to fulfill his duties as his loyal servant. Ling Si welcomed him back. Dumpling repeated questioningly, Master. She asked if he wasn't Ling Si's friend. The protagonist introduced her. Dumpling, looking at the knight from all sides, said he's very tough and hard. The knight, bowing his head, said he is a knight whose duty is to protect Master, and he wouldn't dare to be called his friend. Ling Si put his hand on his shoulder and thanked him for taking on that lethal blow to save him. Calling him his friend, he told him it felt strange without him by his side. The knight thought about the word friend. Dumpling happily exclaimed that Ling Si's friend is back. She offered to take him to eat something yummy. The protagonist said he didn't need food. Dumpling asked if he wouldn't get hungry if he didn't eat. The knight replied that they summons feed on energy. She asked if energy is yummy and told Ling Si that she wants to eat energy too. The protagonist raised an eyebrow and said she wants to eat everything. Pressing the interface button, Ling Si suggested to return to Longyu Town. He said to the Knight of the Glorious that, because of his size, it won't be convenient for him to follow behind them. The protagonist said, before resurrecting him, he had updated the summon system. He told him to go in there and change his appearance. The knight obeyed. Dumpling pushed the knight with a smile, hurrying him along. Ling Si told her that it was rude and she couldn't just touch people she liked. Dumpling said about the knight being in. The protagonist pressed the headless mode button. The knight's head flying in the air appeared in front of the protagonist. Dumpling jumped to the knight, calling him Uncle Knight, and said he was much nicer now. The knight, a little embarrassed, said Uncle Knight sounds rather nice. Ling Si asked why he was blushing. He thought that it's happening again, and even though the Knight of the Glorious AI was already rather advanced to begin with Dumpling around, his intelligence and emotions seemed to have reached a whole new level. Dumpling hugged the knight's head with a happy smile, and Ling Si thought this was pretty good too. He told the knight that he no longer needed to call him master. The knight exclaimed in surprise, and while continuing to call him master, he said he understood. He asked him if he had killed that dragon-scaled demon in the end, because he had no memories of anything after being consumed by its flames. Eyes wide, the protagonist covered his mouth with his hand and told him to be quiet. Dumpling asked about the dragon-scaled demon, not understanding what they were talking about. Ling Si, smiling awkwardly, said it's nothing and Uncle Knight was just sharing some thoughts about dungeons and she's misheard him. Dumpling said they were both acting strange. She watched the white butterfly with interest, and the knight said he understood, and Dumpling was hatched out of that demon egg. He apologized to the protagonist. The knight said he almost let the cat out of the bag. Ling Si said it wasn't his fault, and he didn't know about it either. He told him to try not to let Dumpling know that he'd stolen her from her mother's side. The protagonist added that her mother is probably still looking for her right now. He said just thinking about that sovereign-rank dragon-scaled demon makes his head hurt. Knight said Dumpling keeps calling Master Daddy, and it seems like she doesn't remember anything about her mother. Ling Si said his guess is she's imprinted on him. He said fledglings will take the first creature they see upon hatching to be their parent, and that is also why some species of birds would lay their eggs in other birds' nests. That way, when the fledglings are hatched, they would take those birds to be their parents. The protagonist suggested that perhaps, as someone who was hatched from an egg, Dumpling has that trait too. The knight asked what would happen if Dumpling met his birth mother. Ling Si, putting his face on his hand, said he didn't know, but this kid is rather special. Dumpling, surrounded by many butterflies, shouted for them to look. The protagonist suggested keeping it a secret for now. The knight obeyed. Ling Si wondered if, in case Dumpling were to find out about her mother, she would be sad. Longyu Town. Looking at the bulletin board, the protagonist said there are new leads. Knight asked if it was a new dungeon. Ling Si said yes and thought he remembered from his previous life that when one's reputation with Longyu Town reaches a certain point, new dungeon locations would be unlocked. Because the passage of the dead they just cleared is related to Longyu Town, Ling Si's reputation has increased, and it just so happens that in this new dungeon there is the second heart he needs. On the piece of paper it says wanted, poison dragon. Ling Si thought that now that Knight of the Glorious has been revived, and with a weapon like Dumpling by his side, perhaps they'll be able to get that second heart with just the three of them. Frowning, the protagonist smirked in anticipation. Knight asked Ling Si if he was sure they could clear this dungeon with just three of them. The protagonist told him not to worry because he was sure. Holding a torch in his hand, he said it looked like they were here. In front of them was a large round red portal. Underground world, passage to the Dragon Soul Cave. Ling Si said the entrance of this dungeon is really well hidden. Looking at the dialogue box, he said the boss of this dungeon has a dragon-type heart, which is exactly what he needs. The original plan was to spend more time with Shadow to get familiarized with the underground world, then come to challenge this dungeon. The protagonist thought that, unexpectedly, he happened to find out about Dumpling's ability while they were in the passage of the undead, and, for the sake of clearing this dungeon without a hitch, he has to choose the best method available to him. With a confident smirk, Ling Si thought with Dumpling around, he can sweep any dungeon in the underground world. He suddenly started laughing ridiculously, and Dumpling asked him if he was okay. Looking at the red portal, the protagonist said according to the dungeon information, most of the monsters in the dungeon are around level 75. After completing the dragon-scaled demon mission and obtaining the first clear of the Howling Mad King dungeon, Ling Si is now level 72. However, he is still considered underleveled for this dungeon, and if they can clear this dungeon with just the three of them, all the experience and rewards will go to Ling Si, and he should then be able to go up another level or two. In the main character's previous life, the first player to get the level 100 was given a unique reward. Ling Si thought he would have to take a good look at the level ranking board after completing the mission to collect all 3 hearts and upgrading his dagger to legendary rank. With a legendary weapon, he might just be able to get to level 100 in one breath. Frowning, the protagonist thought that, at present, the person who's most likely to become the first level 100 should still be immovable Dark Lines. Clenching his fist forcefully, Ling Si remembered that, in his previous life, he was the first to become level 100. Thinking about the fact that he had asked to meet him in the real world, he thought he had no idea what he's planning, and he must be careful. Knight said to the main character he could sense that this dungeon is going to be extremely difficult, and the boss should be at sovereign rank. Looking at the red portal, Ling Si wondered if he really should go with Insanity, or if he should change the difficulty level. He said he'd be able to get more experience with Insanity. Frowning his eyebrows, he thought that in this life, he would definitely be the first to reach level 100. The protagonist told the knight not to worry because they have their killer weapon, Dumpling. He said he's prepared loads of yummy sweets, and he never goes into a fight without ample preparations. The knight asked in surprise about the sweets. Dumpling with sparkling eyes asked to give candy to her. Ling Si said, "Let's go." To the Dragon Soul Cave. They came out of the red portal. The main character said there really are lots of mobs here. Knight told him to be careful because he can sense abundant dark attribute energy coming from them. The dragon-headed monster exhaled forcefully through its large nostrils. Knight told the protagonist that mobs have noticed them. Ling Si asked how this is possible. He said they should still be outside of their aggro range. Knight said they are all level 75 monsters, and their level is higher than his. The monsters were holding huge axes. The protagonist, noticing their demon horns, said there's nothing to be afraid of, and Dumpling will be able to suppress them. He told Dumpling it's up to her now. Dumpling, furrowing her eyebrows, said she doesn't like it here. She said she doesn't like them, and they don't like her either. Ling Si surprisedly asked that they don't like her. Dumpling said they think she wants to challenge them. The protagonist wondered if they were a species that are enemies of the dragon-scaled demons. He realized that's why they triggered their aggro even when they are so far away. The huge monster swung his axe. The black sword blocked the enemy's axe. The knight holding the black sword told Ling Si to be careful because these monsters have become unusually violent and are full of aggression. Using extreme fury, the monster let out a loud sound and opened its mouth furiously. Extreme fury. When an enemy race intrudes upon the monster's territory, they will be full of rage and go berserk. The aggro range and attack power of monsters with this status condition will be increased by 30%. Frowning, Ling Si thought 30% is way too much. Shrouded in electricity, he struck several opponents, breaking the stone surroundings. The protagonist thought this is bad because he used up all his holy elixirs in the Howling Mad King dungeon, and his damage isn't high enough now. Dumpling hit her opponents with a stream of pink energy, and Ling Si praised her. He thought Dumpling's dark attribute and the Knight of the Glorious Holy attribute attacks were effective against them. The Knight swung his sword enveloped in yellow energy, landing behind the Knight and Dumpling. The protagonist thought, if he exits an insanity-level dungeon just like that, he'll be punished by losing an enormous amount of experience, and he'll just have to depend on the two of them to deal damage this time. However, the attack power of all the monsters in this dungeon has increased by 30%, and they won't be able to last very long with their HP. Frowning, Ling Si thought he had to calm down, and there must be some other way. Since the dungeon's setting is that the monsters will become berserk upon seeing intruders of another species, there should be a setting that's beneficial to the players as well. Otherwise, the design of this dungeon would be simply unreasonable. The main character had an epiphany and thought he remembered players talking about this dungeon on the forum in his previous life, and there's a hidden mission in this dungeon that will reward players with an attribute. The attribute rewarded is chosen at random, and all this happened in a later stage of the game in his previous life, so no one needed that attribute to clear the dungeon. Gradually, the mission faded from everyone's minds. Ling Si thought that, if he remembers correctly, this dungeon isn't that big, and the location of the mission shouldn't be too far away. He shouted to listen to him and said he'll do crowd control. The main character told Dumpling and the Knight that they would be in charge of dealing damage. The Knight obeyed and Dumpling watched the main character above their heads. Ling Si dodged the attacks of various monsters, Dumpling hit them with lasers of pink energy, and the Knight swung his sword. The pink energy began to gather in front of Dumpling's face, and there was a human-like silhouette in front of her. The protagonist shouted to her not to kill this monster. Grabbing her by the shoulders, he turned her around and a stream of pink energy shot out in the other direction, hitting the stone hillock. Dumpling asked him why. Ling Si told her to look at his name. He said it's in yellow, and he's a neutral monster and the key to the mission he's looking for. A monster that looked like a man with blonde hair was holding a cat with a smile. The dialogue box read, "For the love of cats, destroy all cat-abusing monsters in this region. Everyone, let's come together to protect our cute little kitties." Putting his hand on his chest, the man bowed his head and thanked them for speaking out for the love of cats. The dialogue box says, "Mission completion reward, the cat's gratitude. Every 10 seconds, a cat's meow will recover 5% of the player's HP." Ling Si said this reward buff is pretty good. Dumpling exclaimed only evil baddies would bully such a cute thing. A swirl of green energy appeared behind the protagonist. Turning around, he said it was the spot where Dumpling had just hit. The Knight said he could sense it. He said it's the dungeon boss. Ling Si told Dumpling she really had done him in this time. The monster swung its huge blue tail. It hit the ground with force, and Ling Si dodged it with a jump. Standing on the monster's tail, he ran along the dragon's body, enveloped in electricity. The protagonist used elemental manifestation Thunderflash, and a magical barrier appeared between him and the dragon. Ling Si noticed the barrier and thought his attacks couldn't get through at all. The cankerous dark dragon, level 86, exhaled forcefully through its large nostrils and swore at the human. Squinting, he said what's even worse is the stench of that dragon-scaled demon. Dumpling used Dark Beam, and a stream of pink energy hit the dragon's magical barrier. The dragon said, to think it's a dragon-scaled demon youngling. Smoke came out through Dumpling's teeth, and the dragon said it was an insult to his dark dragon clan. The Knight told Ling Si the boss's protective barrier could block Dumpling's dark attribute attacks. The main character replied this is certainly unexpected. He thought he didn't expect the boss to appear out of nowhere just like that, and, even though that saves him the trouble of dealing with the mobs in between, he can't say for sure that it's a good thing to suddenly be thrown into a battle he's unprepared for. The dragon raised its closed maw upwards, inhaling the air forcefully. Ling Si shouted it's going to exhale. A bright green slurry poured out of the dragon's mouth, and the Knight blocked it with Holy Barrier. The protagonist was poisoned, and he thought its breath inflicts poison damage. He opened a bottle of superior antidote. Running up to Dumpling, he called out to her. Standing beside her, Ling Si told her to drink it, and Dumpling, clasping her eyes, began to drink the contents of the bottle. The protagonist tensely glanced to the side. The dragon swung its huge paw at them. Raising his sword, the Knight struck the dragon's paw with it and told him not to even dream of getting close to his master. The main character said with a smile that it's great having the Knight of the Glorious around. Dumpling told the Knight that he could do it. Squinting his eyes, Ling Si thought that he needed to find a way to break through the boss's defense barrier. Under normal circumstances, with a full team, there would be enough total damage to break the protective barrier. However, as Ling Si lacks the holy attribute, his attacks won't do much damage to the boss, and if he uses his ultimate skills just to break the barrier now, he doesn't know how he is supposed to take care of the boss after breaking the barrier. The dragon hit the Knight and he fell to the ground. Ling Si struck the dragon's protective barrier with his dagger. He noticed the dragon's tail approaching. The dragon hit the protagonist with its tail and said, "To think a dragon-scaled demon would be in cahoots with a human. How sad." He began to gasp for air and said, in the name of his dark dragon clan, he'll kill them off one by one. Dumpling, in front of whose face the pink energy was gathering, told him he wasn't to hurt them. Green energy was gathering in front of the dragon's mouth. Using Crimson Lightning Beam, Dumpling struck the dragon's magic barrier with pink energy. Pink energy pierced the barrier. There was an explosion, and the dragon opened its mouth in pain. The knight said, "Annoying barrier is broken." Ling Si said the dark and lightning attribute attack was Dumpling. The image of the dragon-scaled demon was visible behind Dumpling, and she said the dark dragon clan was indeed annoying. Ling Si wondered in surprise why Dumpling has elemental magic, and it's the same as his. He wondered if it could be because of his blood. The protagonist asked Dumpling if he was okay. Dumpling, barely able to stand, replied that she was fine, just a little dizzy. The knight said the skill might have been too much for her, and, after all, she just exerted such enormous power with that small body of hers. Ling Si thought that, indeed, the power of that skill just now was greater than the power of a regular dungeon team combined. He noticed the poison fog around him. The dungeon was filled with green fog. The dialogue box says, "The destruction of the cankerous dark dragon's protective barrier has triggered the region's poison fog." The knight, noting that it's an AoE poison fog, said it's expected of a sovereign rank boss. Ling Si thought it looks like antidotes won't do anymore, and, if it were a regular team, this continuous depletion of HP would be a great burden to the healer. He grinned and said, unfortunately for him, this poison fog won't work against them. The dialogue box said, "Poison status, 2.5% of your HP will be deducted every 5 seconds. Ling Si said this is all thanks to that cute little kitty, which gave them such a useful buff. Every 10 seconds, a cat's meow will recover 5% of the player's HP. Clutching the dagger in his hand, the protagonist said, "Now that the barrier is destroyed, the boss's weak point is wide open." He told everyone to attack its belly. Ling Si said with a smirk that, anyway, it looks like victory is theirs. He stabbed the dragon's scales with his daggers. Even if he is without any holy elixirs, even if he's underleveled for this dungeon, even if his damage is greatly reduced, so what? The dragon's health was gradually decreasing, and the protagonist grinned, thinking, without its barrier, this sovereign rank pest is a mere plaything to him. The dragon angrily swore at him. Ling Si told him to get angry. He thought that now he needed him to follow him right into his trap. A knight stood in the green mist, shining blue light from beneath his helmet. Raising his sword, he thrust it into the dragon's chest, slicing it open. In front of them was the dragon's blue heart, and the knight told the protagonist that the boss's weak point was exposed. Ling Si thought he just has to strike its weak point, and that way he'll be able to deal real damage even without any holy elixirs. Shrouded in electricity, he thought that the bonus for hitting its weak spot is double the damage. Using elemental manifestation, Thundershot, Ling Si struck the dragon in the chest. The dragon's health dropped below half and its eyes burned red. After stabbing the dragon's heart with the dagger, the protagonist thought, because he's underleveled, the damage is still not enough and he has to hit it with another ultimate move. He was surprised to notice that its wound is recovering. His arm and leg were stuck in the dragon's body. Gritting his teeth, Ling Si thought that it was quick and his arm almost got trapped. The knight, looking up, called out to the master. Dumpling called the knight. She asked to send her up here because she doesn't have the energy to fly. The knight told her not to push herself because her strength has not yet recovered. Breathing heavily, Dumpling said her daddy needs her. The dragon asked if he wanted to kill him in one blow. He said with a chuckle, "What a joke." Swinging his paw, it said the one who's going to die is him. The knight plunged his sword into the dragon's paw. He said Ling Si looked up. The protagonist looked up in surprise. Dumpling, riding a Pegasus, told him to dodge. Pink energy began to gather in front of her face. Using Crimson Lightning Beam, she fired a stream of pink energy. The stream of energy hit the dragon, raising a huge cloud of dust. Knight and Dumpling were sitting on top of the Pegasus. They glanced to the side. Ling Si, using the vessel of the restless chaos, rose into the air, leaving behind a trail of electricity, flames, and water. In his hand was a blue dragon heart. The dialogue box says, "You have received the mission item, Heart of the Cankerous Dark Dragon." The protagonist thought he got it. The dialogue box says, "Congratulations on killing the Cankerous Dark Dragon. As the first player to clear the Dragon Soul Cave dungeon, your deeds have been recorded. Congratulations, you have obtained a bonus first clear experience reward, a reward for clearing a dungeon above your level, and a reward for clearing the dungeon as a solo player." Ling Si reached level 76 and thought that, right now, there's something that's more important than all of these. He asked Dumpling and the knight if they were all right. The knight, holding Dumpling in his arms, said she had fallen asleep, and casting 2 energy beams in a row had taken a serious toll on her body. Frowning, Ling Si said right now she is very weak. Dumpling slept with her cheeks flushed with heat. Ling Si urged to get out of here and hurry to Longyu Town. Longyu Town, Pet Alliance Branch Office. The dialogue box next to the door announced that the diagnosis was complete. The main character asked the doctor how Dumpling is. The doctor replied that his pet is fine. Longyu Town's pet doctor was a man with round glasses, a big nose and a beard. He said, however, her energy levels are very weak, and it seems that she has forcibly used some kind of skill that requires massive amounts of physical and mental energy. He told Lingxi that she just needs some good rest to regain her physical and mental energy. The main character said with a smile, "That's good to hear." The knight told him that, as Dumpling just awakened her special attribute just now, that powerful attack would cost her huge amounts of energy, and, when she decided to cast that last crimson lightning beam, she was indeed already rather exhausted. He said Dumpling probably knew she would faint if she were to use that skill a second time, however, as she urgently wanted to save him, he didn't stop her. Lingxi remained silent. He asked the doctor if they may go in to see her. The doctor replied in the affirmative and told them she should be awake by now. The knight and the protagonist walked through the door. They looked in surprise at the people in front of them. Dumpling was surrounded by various sweets and snacks, and Lingxi thought it looked like the NPC doctor had also fallen for Dumpling's charms. The doctor said she kept saying she wanted to eat candy in her sleep, so he prepared lots of snacks for her. Dumpling had a happy face and ate the candy. The protagonist said it looks like there's really nothing wrong with her. He noticed a message from Narlo. He looked at the dialogue box questioningly. On the dialogue box was a message from Narlo. Ruko is challenging Advent of 1000 Autumn's #1 shield. Narlo said person is nicknamed the strongest shield in the game. He asked if Lingxi wanted to come to take a look. Lingxi asked what's going on and where are they. Narlo replied that they're in the arena dungeon, and, to be precise, it's a recreational dungeon where players compete with statistics. He said, even so, he thought it would be good to let him know. The main character asked him if he was sure the person Ruko was challenging was the #1 guild's strongest shield. Narlo replied he is sure. Lingxi said he'll be there soon. In Lingxi's past life, the 6 heavenly shields held unparalleled prestige in Heavenland, and their supporters would often get into heated fights over their rankings. Among the 6, there are 3 who do not belong to any guilds. Leveraging their reputation, they established an organization called Dark Martial. However, this organization has yet to surface in this life, and perhaps they will appear sometime in the near future. As for the other 3, apart from Ruko and Student Inch, it's the one who they call the strongest shield in Heavenland from the #1 guild, Advent of 1000 Autumns, Hakishi and Bido. 1 hour ago, as the man stepped out of the blue portal, he exclaimed that this was an arena dungeon, and it was their first time here. Tilly's asked if his kind of minor dungeon isn't a place for kids, and why there are so many people here. She said it would be better to just go to the battleground, and it's a waste of her time. Tilly's asked Narlo why he brought them here. Narlo said with a smile that minor dungeons also have interesting things to do. He said assessing one's stats is the main reason why players come here. While this is only a minor recreational dungeon, it's a large public zone, and there are many pro players who come here too. He said Ruko is having fun. Ruko ran around, studying the things around him. When he came to the board, he said this math problem was too easy. It was written on the board, 4 + 2. Tilly's asked if that was why she said it was a place for children. Ruko looked over and exclaimed that there was a big line, and it looked like it was something fun. Narlo and Tilly's looked to the side. Ruko said he's going over to take a look. Apologizing, he squeezed through the crowd. He opened his eyes wide, and in front of him was the strength assessment machine. A guy in dark armor punched the blue circle. The large display glowed with a blue light. A voice announced that he had received 40 points. Ruko exclaimed with sparkling eyes, that looks really fun. The guy looking at his fist frustratedly said his hand is all swollen, yet he only scored 40 points. The girl with red hair said warrior's gear and level is that of a top-tier division players, and, even so, he only scored 40 points. She said's leagues away from the record holder who scored 92 points. Ruko asked who is the record holder who scored 92 points. The guy with blonde hair replied that the rankings are on the screen, and he thinks it was set by the #1 guild's #1 shield. The screen said, Hakishi and Bido, Advent of 1000 Autumns, 92 points. Space Demon, Divine Chamber, 71 points. Happy Alone, Wolf's Fang, 55 points. Obsession, Heavenly Supreme, 44 points. Snow White Stepmom, Heavenly Supreme, 42 points. Ruko asked in surprise about the #1 shield, Hakishi and Bido. He thought that's the idol of many players who play as tanks, and 92 points is amazing. A voice behind asked about the #1 guild's #1 shield. They said 92 points isn't a full mark yet. Tilly said she'd like to give it a try and see how much she might score, and there might just be a new record. She asked Ruko if he is going to give it a go too. Tilly suggested we have a competition. Ruko agreed with a smile. The girl with red hair asked who they are. She asked if they're actually thinking of breaking the #1 shield's record. Narlo said he'll go first. He swung his fist, shrouded in electricity, and hit the blue circle. The display showed he scored 62 points. Narlo excitedly asked how he did. When he saw that he scored 62 points, he sighed disappointedly. The girl with red hair exclaimed that his stance was so casual, but he actually got 62 points, which makes him number 3 on the leaderboard. Tilly's, calling him Mr. Burden, told him that, even if he's not a strength-based warrior, 62 points is way too low. Puffing up his cheeks, Narlo said he would wait to see how many points a mage like her could get. A staff appeared in Tilly's hand, and she struck a blue circle with the flame. Frowning, she smirked. A voice asked the players to use only their fists. Narlo told her not to try to cheat. Tilly's grudgingly said it was mage discrimination. With a cluck of her tongue, she split her staff in two. With a smirk, she used fist-fighting form and said she was a melee battle mage. Fist-fighting form, your intelligence will be converted to strength. A person in the crowd asked in surprise that this mage was a melee mage. Tilly struck the blue circle, raising a cloud of dust. She scored 77 points and, squaring her shoulders, said it's been a while since she used her fist-fighting ability, and she's gotten too weak. A guy in the crowd said he didn't think a mage could get 77 points in a strength assessment. Another guy said, with that, she's number 2 on the leaderboard, and that's crazy. Tilly's told Narlo with a smug smile that she, the mage, was stronger than he, the warrior. Narlo puffed up his cheeks resentfully. Ruko asked Darkfeather if he was going to try. Pulling out his pistols, he started firing at the blue circle. Ruko asked in surprise what he was doing. A voice shouted that he could only use his fists, and the player was disqualified. Ruko, Tilly's, and Narlo looked silently at Darkfeather, who turned around and said it was boring. They said only Ruko was left. Squaring his shoulders, Ruko walked over to the assessment machine. The guy with blonde hair raised an eyebrow with a smirk and asked if that little kid was just here to play. The girl with red hair agreed and said he didn't look like he had any power at all. Looking at the blue circle, Ruko thought that Hakishi and Bito is the idol of warriors. He wondered if he could get 92 points too. Ruko thought that number 1 on the ranking board is really eye-catching. However, the most important thing is Ling Xi's hopes for them, Shadow. His fist grew larger, and he said he'd like to set the top score and make Ling Xi proud. He said he will show everyone how strong Penumbra is. The girl with red hair asked if she was hallucinating, and if Ruko's hand was getting bigger. Swinging his fist, Ruko grinned, thinking this was also to prove his worth. Hitting the blue circle with his fist, he thought he's no longer the little Ruko who has to rely on others. A huge cloud of dust rose above him. A guy and a girl in the crowd watched in shock. Ruko scored 92 points, and someone exclaimed he got the same score as Advent of 1000 Autumn's number 1 shield, and they're tied in first place. Narlo told Ruko that it was amazing. He said with a smile that he's tied with the number 1 shield. Ruko objected and said if it were Ling Xi, he would surely aim for the best. Narlo looked at him in surprise. Ruko, furrowing his eyebrows, said he wants to give another go, and he can surpass Hakishi and Bito. After he met Ling Xi, he has learned one thing from him. Ruko, frowning resolutely, thought that, if he's going to do something, he has to be the best at it. He thought this is something he never even thought of back when he was still a crybaby, and he must get first place. Ruko started to get bigger, tearing his clothes off. The girl with red hair opened her mouth in surprise and said he became ginormous. The guy in black armor asked if it wasn't an illusion. The man in gold armor asked what the huge figure was. Raising his huge fist, Ruko thought this is for Ling Xi, for Penumbra, and above all, for himself. Swinging his fist to strike, he gritted his teeth and struck the blue circle. The guy in gold armor shouted that there's a huge power surge coming from elsewhere there. The guy in mage clothes offered to go see. The guy turned around and said he doesn't even get to sleep in peace. Ruko slammed his fist into the blue circle. Orange energy enveloped the machine. The value on the display began to rise, going past 90. The girl with red hair asked in surprise if he was really going to break the number 1 shield's record. The guy with blonde hair started cheering Ruko on. The number on the display reached 92 points. People in the crowd wondered if it was another tie. Ruko looked at the display, frowning. The number on the display reached 95 points, and a voice announced that he had gotten 95 points and a new record was born. Ruko shrank, and Narlo, praising him, exclaimed happily that this was to be expected from their tank. The girl with the red hair exclaimed in surprise that he had indeed broken the record. She said, "Sure enough, this is Penumbra, the guild with the most potential right now, and their members are all very strong." Ruko took the first place on the leaderboard, and he thought that he did just the way he always pursues being number 1. The man stepped forward with a steel boot and said his movements were pretty good. Standing on the dais, he said the way Ruko exerted force wasn't quite right, and the way he did it, 95 points was the maximum he could achieve. Tilly's irritably asked him who he was to be spouting such high and mighty criticism. A girl with red hair in the noisy crowd, agreeing with Tilly's, shouted at him to try it himself since he was so good. She told him not to look down on him just because he's a child, and to do it himself if he thinks he can. Narlo said he does indeed have the qualifications to give that critique. He said with a grim face he's the original record holder who scored 92 points. Narlo said he is the #1 guild, Advent of 1000 Autumn's #1 shield, Hakishi and Bido. Ruko opened his eyes in surprise, frowning. Hakishi and Bido stood before them with a smirk. He had fiery red hair, pointy ears, and strong muscles with tattoos on his shoulders. Smiling, he said, now that he has an opponent, he can get serious. A person in the crowd said this is no joke and that it is Hakishi and Bido in the flesh. He said they need to start recording. Another person asked what he was doing in here. Ruko thought that he didn't think he'd be seeing him today. Narlo asked Bido if he was going to give it a go too. Ruko asked if they knew each other. Narlo replied, "You can say that." Bido said he came here to go AFK and take a nap, but he was awakened by the impact of this little guy's blow. He said he even broke his record, so he wants to show what he can do right away. Narlo countered that it wasn't his turn and he couldn't go out of line. Bido, scratching the back of his head awkwardly, apologized and said he would get in line. A guy in the crowd said it's okay and he can go first because he's a big fan of his. Tilly said this guy doesn't look very bright. Ruko, furrowing his eyebrows, said it's not like that and he's read descriptions of his team battles on the forum before. He said, in those descriptions, he's much more powerful than he looks right now. Bido, calling out to Ruko, asked him if he was the one who just broke his record. Ruko hesitantly answered in the affirmative. Frowning, he thought that he should be confident even if Hakishi and Bido was in front of him. Pointing his thumb at himself, he shouted that it was him, Ruko from Penumbra and the Tank of Shadow. Bido looked at him with a surprised smile. Leaning over to him, he said he was talented and would achieve extraordinary things. Straightening up, he turned around and said, however, judging from his performance, he's just a talented person. Ruko asked what that was supposed to mean. Bido said the 92-point score was just something he got with a casual punch. He told Ruko that he doesn't even know how to properly exert his force and, with his technique, even if he uses the full extent of his power, 95 points will be the most he can achieve. Turning around, Bido said, as for the extraordinary things he'll achieve, they'll be just like his score, 95 points and not a single point more. Tilly's irritably said he talks as if he's great. She asked him how about actually competing. Ruko, after a little silence, asked him if he could tell him what he was missing. Tilly's looked at Ruko in surprise, Bido said there's no point in talking about it. He told him to watch him. Turning around, he grinned and asked if he would like to see how he does it. Ruko said yes, Bido told him he's too reliant on the power afforded by the game's skills, and all skills are merely data. Slowly moving his hands, he said it's the skills data that is what's limiting his true power. Bido said true power has to come from within. He told him not to fall back on a routine set of moves. He said he has to know how to adapt and improvise and, just like Top Time, feel the connection and balance between him as a player and the game. With his eyes closed, Bido told him to do nothing to achieve everything and pursue the strength-based Top Time. When he opened his eyes, he slammed his fist on the blue circle and told Ruko to be water. Everyone around him watched him in amazement. The display above the machine, bathed in red energy, showed the number 100. A voice announced that Bido had scored 100 points. Bido said, once one understands what he's just said, anyone can score full marks with such 100-point machines. Ruko listened to him in surprise. Bido said, however, with regards to understanding, the difference between him and Ruko lies in the difference between a genius and a talented person. Bido took first place on the leaderboard, and people looked at it astonished. The girl with red hair exclaimed that Bido was back in first place, and on top of that, he got the maximum score. Ruko thought it's not just 100 points, and it's just that there's an upper limit to this machine's strength assessment capabilities. Recalling Bido's punch, he thought he didn't even get to see when he struck, and it's incredible for a player to have such great compatibility with his skills and technique. He thought that's the difference between them too. Bido said, where he is not a place where someone with just some talent like Ruko can surpass with hard work alone. He told him with a smile that he's still too green. Ruko stood with his fists clenched, and Bido told him that he's far from surpassing a genius like him. He told him to just be a mediocre warrior as he is. Ruko clenched his teeth, frowning. Narlo thought it's a little too far. Tilly swung her staff at Bido and asked irritably what he was going on about genius or talent of whatever. Tilly struck him with the staff, and Bido blocked the attack with his hands. Grabbing her staff with his hand, he asked about attacking him so casually out of nowhere. He told her he could kill her right now, it would be an act of self-defense, and he won't bear any punishment. Tilly's, frowning, thought he was fast. Pistols appeared in Darkfeather's hands, and he began firing. Bido covered himself with a shield of red energy from the bullets and said the Penumbra people, were very rude. Tilly's, freeing herself from his grip, bounced back. A guy in dark armor excitedly asked about what they were fighting. The girl with red hair said to hurry up and record this. She said this is a clash between the pros of Penumbra and Thousand Autumns. And Beto said with a smile that they know they are no match for him, but they are still doing this to stand up for the little guy. He said, a person who only knows how to let his teammates fight his battles. And Beto said, as expected, Ruko is just a mediocre warrior. Ruko rounded his eyes in shock. Tilly's annoyedly shouted that she's merely doing this because she wants to beat him up. Narlo, putting a hand on her shoulder, told her not to be rash because this is not a good place for them to gang up on him. He shouted for everyone to stop and told them that there was no need for them to create conflict between their guilds here. And Beto asked what is wrong with that. He said he was rather into it. Narlo, flown, told him that he doesn't think his guildmaster would want to see him being so into it. Scratching the back of his head awkwardly, Beto said he had almost forgotten about it. There was a shout of please accept my PK request. Dark Feather, Narlo and Beto turned around. The dialogue box said, you have sent a PK request. Standing in front of him was Ruko with the dialogue box in front of him. With a determined frown, he asked Beto to have a duel with him. Beto asked him with a grin if he was sure. Ruko, furrowing his eyebrows, replied he is sure. Beto and Ruko stood opposite each other in the ring, surrounded by people. They stood across from each other, ready to fight. Tilly's asked why even go through the trouble of having a PK match, because they should just combine forces and give him a beating. Narlo replied Beto is not going to be easy to deal with. He said, if you ask him, it doesn't seem like he's looking down on Ruko either, and it seems like he's trying to goad him into action. Narlo said he wants to teach Ruko something. Beto asked Ruko if he needs to gigantify before they fight. He said he can give him as much time as he needs to prepare. Ruko said he has his own rhythm. Opening one eye, Beto said he was just worried that he'd be too much of a glass cannon and fall too soon. A shield appeared in Ruko's hand, and he thought he couldn't let the opponent sway his emotions. He thought Lingxi taught him that he had to have his own way of fighting. Ruko rushed to attack. After hitting the ground with his shield, he used shield diffusion and 3 more shields appeared between them, shrouded in orange energy. Clenching his fist, Beto struck the 3 shields. Ruko, circling him from the side, thought he had to catch him by surprise and used the advantages of his current physique to go out all with speed. Once behind his opponent's back, he struck with his fist. Beto turned around, and red energy slammed Ruko to the ground. Ruko bounced to the side, and Beto said, as he told him before, he's too reliant on his skills, and that's making him forget his instincts and reactionary abilities. He asked if he was trying to compete with him with speed when he didn't even understand that. Ruko thought about instincts and reactionary abilities. Frowning, he silently stared ahead. Using swirling shield impact, he threw his shield at Beto, and Beto closed with a barrier of red energy. Ruko threw shields at him from all sides, and Beto asked if he really thought increasing the frequency of his skills was going to help him win. He said it's only going to deplete his energy. Ruko remembered how Lingxi told him, when facing an opponent stronger than himself, he shouldn't just think about relying on skills to win, but to rely on his mind and senses to search for the key to victory. He thought Lingxi once told him something similar, and Beto with his eyes closed said these ranged attacks are completely useless against him. Using shield diffusion, Ruko swung his fist and told him to try his melee attacks on for size. Smirking, Beto noted that he was spamming those skills earlier to hide his intention to perform a melee attack, that way he wanted to catch him off guard and win. He asked if he was sure he could break through his defenses. Ruko said he was wrong and his defense is not airtight. He said he observed that, while he's guarding one side, the other side would be left open. Swinging his fist, Beto said it's interesting. He said, let's compete with the speed of our fists. He opened his eyes in surprise and saw Ruko in front of him, who had his eyes closed, and he thought this little guy is using his senses. Beto swung his fist, and Ruko dodged. He smirked, and he said he could clearly see the speed of his fists. Beto thought he'd improved. Swinging his fist again, he said it still wasn't enough. Ruko flew up into the air above the location with a blow mark on his face. He began to fall, and Beto's red energy was visible in the ring. The guy in black armor exclaimed that he sent the kid flying. Beto said with a smile that it's pretty far. He said he has to say this little guy is pretty good, and he was able to grasp top time in such a short time. Ruko thought this punch was really fast. Lingxi appeared in front of him. Tilly's told Narlo to hurry up and go get Ruko. Narlo obeyed at first, but then asked what they were doing. Frowning, Tilly's took the staff in her hand and said they're going to reclaim their honor. Pistols appeared in Dark Feather's hands. They ran to the ring and Tilly shouted that it was her turn. She offered Beto a duel. Scratching the back of his head, Beto said he wasn't interested anymore. Tilly's angrily asked if he was going to run away now that he'd won. The voice told Tilly's to let it go. Lingxi appeared behind Beto. Beto wondered when he appeared behind him. The protagonist asked if he was the Thousand Autumn's #1 shield. and Beto asked him who he was. Narlo exclaimed happily that Ling Si had arrived, and then noticed Ruko. Ruko told Tillies and Darkfeather that he accepts his defeat wholeheartedly. His face was covered in bruises. He thanked them for standing up for him. Turning to everyone, he apologized for embarrassing Penumbra. Darkfeather said, "GG." Tillies said irritably she was already all prepared to strike, and Beto surprisedly asked if he was Penumbra's guildmaster. Ling Si stood with an indifferent expression on his face with his hands in his pockets. The guy in dark armor asked if he was Penumbra's guildmaster. The guy with the blonde hair said he's the superstar player everyone's been talking about on the forum recently, and Beto asked if he was going to fight him. He said Kyujin Shin said relations between the various major guilds are pretty sensitive lately, so he can't make trouble and he doesn't want to have any conflict with Ling Si right now. The protagonist thought this guy was rather frank. He grinned and said he came here to thank him, and Beto exclaimed questioningly. Ling Si said he had just watched the duel between him and Ruko, and it was his guidance that led Ruko to grasp the basis of top time. Scratching the back of his head, Beto said it was nothing and no bother at all. He said, even since their guildmaster came back from his visit to their guild, he has become very interested in them. And Beto said it made him interested in them too, and he just happened to meet him here by chance. He said all he can say is that he has potential. Standing in the ring, hands folded behind his back, and Beto said, however, he's still way too weak to be the main tank of a guild, and, as a genius, he couldn't bear to see him like that, so he taught him some basics. Tillies annoyedly said this redhead can really blabber on. Ruko told her it's fine, and Beto said with a grin that it was a fun day. Ling Si asked him if he was sure he knew Ruko's abilities, and Beto asked if he was trying to say that he hadn't used the full extent of his abilities. Ruko stood there with a grim face. He remembered how he had apologized to Ling Si with clenched teeth and said it was his complete loss this time. The protagonist said there was no need for him to apologize to him. He asked if he remembered how much time had passed since they first met. Ruko replied that it had been over a year. Ling Si said, from the crybaby you were in the beginning, to the courage you showed in challenging the #1 shield today. Ruko asked if he was here from the beginning. He asked why he didn't show himself. The protagonist said he wanted to witness his transformation. He told him that he'd grown a lot. Ruko stared at him silently with a look of surprise on his face. Clenching his trembling fist, he said he's still far from the true pros. Ling Si said no. Kneeling down in front of him, he said in his eyes he is much more powerful than he thinks he is. Ruko listened to his words with wet eyes. The protagonist told him that he needed to believe in himself. He said with a smile that the bravery he showed today would be the foundation for his future growth. Tears appeared in Ruko's eyes, and Ling Si told him to remember this feeling of defeat, even if he's lost. He asked if he still wished to surpass Beto. Ruko answered yes. In the present tense, Ling Si, pointing his finger at Beto, said Ruko is the most talented shield he's ever seen, and there's no question about the fact that he will become the strongest shield in Heavenland in the future. He said, 1 week. Narlo and the people in the crowd listened to him in surprise. The protagonist told Beto to fight Ruko again in 1 week. Tillies listened to him with a slight smile. Ling Si asked Beto if he dares accept the challenge. Ruko stood, looking resolutely forward. Beto asked with a smirk if 1 week would be enough. He said it looked like it would be fun. People watched in surprise as he left the ring in one big leap. Landing next to Ruko, Beto said it's only going to be 1 week. He asked Ruko if he was sure he wouldn't disappoint him. Ruko replied that he didn't know, but his goal was to surpass him. Beto said surpassing a genius like his is a bold statement. He said he'd got him all fired up again. As he left, he waved and said they would see each other in a week. People in the crowd asked in surprise that he had agreed. A man in the crowd said he was looking forward to it. Narlo told Beto to remember to inform the guildmaster about the duel. He said it wouldn't be good if it caused conflict between their guilds. Beto, remembering, exclaimed that he needed to report it to him. He offered to decide on the PK venue later. Narlo landed next to the protagonist. He told him that 1 week was too short and, be it in terms of abilities or equipment, Beto is way ahead. He said, after all, he is one of the main recipients of the resources from the #1 guild. Ling Si said equipment is not a big problem, and their guild will be able to prepare everything they need within a week. Tillies said equipment and such are minor things. Burning with excitement, she said the most important thing is to proceed with a monster training program, and told Ruko she will use the resources of her workshop to help him with his training. She said he must send that so-called genius flying. Ling Si thought about the most important thing to Ruko and asked him if he had a mission that he couldn't complete because there are no mission markers. Ruko said was true. He asked him in surprise how he knew. He said he had tried to complete the mission, but found that there was no such place on the entire map. Ruko said he thought it was called Cowardice of the Stupid Mountain or something like that. Ling Si thought it's Courage of the Sacred Mountain. He smilingly thought that it's time for the one who was nicknamed Sacred Mountain Ruko Zong in his past life to shine. The dialogue box says, Special Blessing Mission, Courage of the Sacred Mountain. Mission details, search for the sacred mountain and for courage. To the once timid one, seek the courage that belongs to you and stand atop the mountain's peak. The map of the area says, no information is available. Ryuko about there being no clue on the map at all. Narlo said it was a strange mission. Ling-Si silently pondered. Tilly said they don't even know what kind of reward this strange mission will bring, and it's better to follow her to her workshop for intensive training. The main character thought he'd read an interview in his previous life where Ryuko talked about his special mission, and he remembers him saying that he found the mission leader in that place. Ling-Si and his team came to the library. Tilly said they're back at the library looking for clues again. She asked if it would really work. Ling-Si said there is great wealth to be found in the books, and many of the leads in the game have been found here. When Ryuko entered the library, he said there were a lot of books. He wondered if there would be a clue to his mission here. Turned around and with a smile told Ling-Si that he was here again. Ryuko noted that this NPC seemed to know Ling-Si well. The protagonist replied that it's because he comes here often. He said this is where he found the information about Mad King Dungeon. Administrator asked what he needed today. Ling-Si said he needed information about blessings, which is one of the random attributes that gives players additional bonuses. Tilly's asked if that was what many promoted players were talking about recently. Ling-Si said, as the game progresses, players are becoming more and more familiar with the special attributes in the game. He said, after being promoted, a large number of players have awakened special attributes, and there's even a thread for players with blessings on the Heavenland forum now. The protagonist added that, however, there is a big difference in how good the various abilities and attributes are, and the attribute Ryuko has is very special. Ryuko asked if that was true. He thoughtfully said his Gigantify attribute is very special. Ling-Si said yes and thought Ryuko's special attribute even has its own specific special mission. Tilly said she doesn't have any special attributes to date, and if you ask her, she thinks Ryuko might even have a shorty special attribute. Administrator said everything on blessings can be found over here. There were huge bookshelves in front of them, and Narlo said it was a lot. Ling-Si said Heavenland is an infinite open world, and there will be more and more information in the time to come. Raising his index finger, he explained that the information on their maps windows is extremely limited, and most of the information there are records of places that they have already unlocked. The protagonist said their task was to find dreams that the players had not yet explored, or places that existed only in text, to help Ryuko find the lead for his special mission. He urged them to begin. 3 hours later, Ling-Si is reading a book near the bookshelf, Dark Feather is staring carelessly out the window, Ryuko is carrying a mountain of books in his hands, Narlo is asleep at the table, and Tilly's is reading a book. Ryuko, waving his arms, shouted at Dark Feather to stop spacing out. Walking over to Narlo, he irritably yelled at him to wake up. Tilly's, closing the book, said the amount of information is way beyond her expectations. She wondered if they would be able to find anything. Ling-Si thought he was sure they were in the right place and wondered where the clue could be. He thought most of the information here are records on the creation of blessings. Looking at the book, he thought he couldn't find anything that's related to Ryuko. Ling-Si told everyone to buckle up. Sleepy Narlo and Ryuko, full of enthusiasm, raised their fists in the air. Dark Feather and Tilly silently went about their business. 6 hours later, Ryuko frowned with eyes tired from reading. Narlo, falling to the floor, exhaled and said he couldn't anymore. Ryuko said his eyes were dying. Tilly's yawned tiredly. Ryuko said he didn't expect Dark Feather to still be able to hold on. Dark Feather read the most touching love stories with interest. Ling-Si suggested we take a break. He said they can't go anywhere since they haven't found anything yet. Looking at the book, he wondered if he was mistaken from the start in attempting to find a clue in these books. The main character thought Ryuko doesn't seem like the king to have the patience to look for a clue in books, and he doubts his personality would be very different from his previous life. Ryuko was tiredly reading a book, surrounded by mountains of books. Ling-Si wondered what he found here back then. Ryuko said the sun is setting. Tilly said it's been a long time since she spent so much effort with books, and she's even more diligent than when she was a student. Narlo said the sunset makes the foot of the mountain look really beautiful from up here, and it's no wonder Dark Feather was spacing out all day in front of the window. Ling-Si thought about the foot of the mountain. He burst out of his seat, and everyone turned around. The protagonist asked the administrator if this place was a mountain a long time ago. The administrator said right, and in ancient times there was a mountain in this spot. Ling-Si, raising an eyebrow in surprise, thought the clue isn't in the materials here, it's the geographical location. Grabbing Ryuko by the shoulders, he told him to focus and try to feel. Frowning, the protagonist told him to take out the courage within him that's driving him to want to become stronger. Ryuko stood there, clenched fists and clenched eyes shrouded in energy. He opened his eyes in surprise. The orange energy was reaching for the symbol on the bookshelf, and Ryuko thought this symbol was calling to him. The bookshelves began to move apart, glowing with a bright orange light. An orange portal appeared in front of Ruko. A dialogue box read, "The mission lead has been found. A mission portal exclusive to Ruko Zong will now be activated." Ruko was surprised to hear that it was a mission exclusive to him. Dark Feather said, "An exclusive mission." Jie. Tillies told Ruko that they couldn't go there with him. Putting his hand on Ruko's shoulder, Lingxi asked him with a smile if he was ready. He said it was his own mission. Ruko looked at the orange portal, and the protagonist said nobody knows what kind of difficulties await him in there. Ruko touched the portal with his hand and told Lingxi he taught him that no matter what difficulties there may be, they must have the courage to conquer them. He said with a smile this lesson is etched firmly into his heart, and he is no longer that crybaby Ruko. Ruko turned around and thanked everyone for their help and patience all this time and said he was ready. With a thumbs up, he said he would definitely come back stronger. Everyone looked at him with a smile and Narlo told him to return victorious. Lingxi said with a kind smile that they would be waiting. Ruko nodded. A bright light illuminated the roof of the library. Looking out the window, Lingxi thought about a trial to seek courage. Looking up with a serious face, he thought the encounter with Enbido led to this opportunity. The protagonist thought, in this life, Ruko has finally stepped onto his path of becoming Sacred Mountain Ruko. A few days later, Enbido decided on the PK venue and got Narlo to deliver the news. Surprisingly, not only did Advent of 1,000 Autumn's Guildmaster, Kyujin Shin, allow for the PK match to take place, but he will also be there in person to spectate. Lingxi thought this was indeed unexpected. After sending the location of the PK venue to Ruko, all that's left is to wait and see if he will be able to complete the trial in time for the duel. 1 week later, Red Lead Arena. Lingxi said he didn't expect Kyujin Shin to come to watch the duel. Kyujin Shin said, after all, his main tank accepted their guild's PK challenge, and relations between the guilds have been rather sensitive recently, so he had to come. He said with a smile it's also because of that they chose the PK venue to be their 1,000 Autumn's arena to reduce the number of spectators as much as possible. Looking at Lingxi, he said no matter who wins, this PK match is a friendly duel, so he hopes it won't affect the relationship between their guilds. The protagonist replied that it's thoughtful, and Enbido asked why Ruko is not here yet. He said it would be really disappointing if he decided to run away. Tillies irritably shouted at him to relax and asked him where he was in a hurry. Lingxi said it seems like there's still quite a bit of tension. Narlo said there's been no news from Ruko for a week, and he wonders if he's going to make it in time. Tillies, clucking his tongue, said if he can't, she will take on this match in his stead. Temptress, putting her face on her hand, said they've been waiting for so long, but he's still not here. Tabazengo said they caused them to lose in the Mad King dungeon, and now they're using Enbido's name to become the talk of the town. He said he wanted to see what they'd do, and asked if it was over before it had even begun. Kyujin Shin said with a smirk that it looks like Penumbra's Ruko is going to forfeit the match. Lingxi said with a slight smile that he was coming. A blue portal appeared not far from Enbido. To the amazement of those around him, Tiana emerged from the portal. Enbido asked about it being a woman. Tiana said he barely made it in time. Ruko put his hand on her shoulder and thanked her for sending him here. Everyone looked toward the portal in surprise. They asked who it was. Out of the portal came Ruko, who looked older and more masculine. He had well-developed muscles and stood with a confident smile on his face. Lingxi said it was Ruko, and he came over. There was a dialogue box next to the main character, and he said let him see how much he had grown. The dialogue box alerted that he had sent Ruko's equipment. Ruko quickly ran forward. Leaping into the air above Enbido, he said he really wanted to tell them what had happened this week. Swinging his fist, he said they would have to wait for him to win this match. A dialogue box announced that the opponent had accepted his PK request. Slowly and concentrating moving his hands, Enbido said it's looking good. Swinging his fist, he told Ruko to show him how he'd changed. Ruko grinned, and Enbido looked at him in surprise. Above Ruko, who spread his arms out to the sides, was a sphere of dark red energy. He thought he could feel the earth. A week ago, Ruko found himself in a field of grass. Raising his head, he wondered where he was. An animal appeared in front of him, pacing the grass with its hooves. The animal's shadow covered Ruko, and he looked up in surprise. Above them was a huge deer, and Ruko exclaimed that this deer was gigantic. The deer grabbed him by the collar with its teeth. It tossed Ruko upward, and Ruko grabbed onto the deer's antlers, hanging onto them. The deer ran forward, swinging Ruko around. All around them were mountains covered in grass and trees, and Ruko wondered where it was taking him. He looked down and saw a dead tree and said it was huge. Ruko jumped off the deer onto the ground. As he approached the tree, he asked why it was so big. He asked the deer why it brought him here. The deer asked Ruko if he could revive this ancient tree. Ruko exclaimed in surprise that it could talk. The deer said his duty was to bring him to this place to complete his mission. Ruko froze for a moment, and then, pointing his finger at the deer, asked if it was telling him that his mission was to revive this tree. The deer replied in affirmative. Ruko said it seemed to him as if this tree had shriveled up a long time ago. He said it was black and dry, and it was unlikely that water would help it. The deer said the ancient tree is still alive. It told Ruko to listen to its voice. Putting his head against the tree, Ruko said he could hear nothing. The deer irritably told him to put his heart into it. Ruko stood in front of the withered tree with his eyes closed. A voice spoke to him, and he opened his eyes. Glowing a bright green light, the tree told him he was the first person to have come to the forest of the mountain. The tree took the form of a huge wooden man and asked if he would be able to inherit its heartbeat.